Standing up to absolute power. Here's our launch text. It's an explanatory model. So here's our essential question. How do people come to have different views in society? We're going to see how this author has a different view and how he expresses it. The purpose of this launch text is to set an explanatory text example. It's a type of writing in which an author presents a thesis and organizes facts and examples to support it. You'll write in this mode for the performance-based assessment at the end of the unit. So, here's your focus. As you read, consider why the writer has chosen the example of an English baron to illustrate his thesis. Mark the facts and examples that explain the events described.
Standing up to absolute power. Rebellions are not always led by the downtrodden. Sometimes even those with the most to lose have felt the need to challenge accepted social practice. One early example of this occurred in 1215 in England, when a group of wealthy barons rose up against their king. The reasons for their rebellion were many and varied. The results of their rebellion changed the course of history. The feudal system. The European feudal system gave the king total control over land rights. He owned the land and leased it to barons. In return for the king's generosity, the barons paid rent or taxes, promised complete loyalty, and provided the king with knights for his army. When they were not busy fighting for the king, the knights leased land from the barons, thus adding to the barons' power and pocketbooks. At the base of the feudal pyramid were the serfs, villains, or peasants. The system required a king with unquestionable authority. Such a king would have the respect of the barons, who would live happily and wealthily, and of the knights, who would be called into battle only during occasional crises. The system may not have benefited the serfs very much, but they had no power or resources to challenge it. King John's quest. England's King John was not a king with unquestionable authority. He had to compete for the throne when his brother Richard died, and his revenge against his rival's supporters made the barons unhappy. John also inherited Richard's debts, accrued during the long and terrible Crusades. To raise money to run the country, John continued Richard's practice of heavily taxing the barons. Shortly after becoming king in 1199, John went to war against France. In rapid succession, he lost lands in Normandy and other parts of what is now the north coast of France. These losses made him appear weak, and they cost the lives of many of the barons' knights. In 1213, King John decided to win back those lost lands. He knew he would need an influx of men and money from England's barons. He demanded knights and gold, but many barons, disgusted with John's self-defeating foreign policy, resisted. John avenged himself by arresting some barons and attacking others in their manners. He went to war as planned, but once again, he lost. Rebellion at last. The barons refused to provide yet more money or men to their now weakened monarch. Instead, they began to make their own demands, which King John rejected. The barons formed their own army, and civil war in England seemed imminent. The archbishop sought to negotiate a short-term peace. In June of 1215, King John agreed to the Articles of the Barons, which would soon become known as Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. The document did not overthrow the king. That was too grand a gesture for the barons, who still enjoyed the benefits of feudal life. Instead, it limited his authority, ensuring that he, too, would be subject to law. The idea that a ruler must abide by laws and retain power only through the consent of the governed was genuinely groundbreaking. It would later find its way into the written products of American and French revolutionaries. Many of those later rebels, like the barons of 1215, had much to lose, but chose to challenge the status quo anyway.
Consider, why do you think the writer chose the example of English barons to illustrate his thesis?